Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at Boonlake. This is a 1 to 4 player action selection, hand management, resource management economic game, where you take the role of pioneers who have settled along the shores of Boonlake. You'll be taking actions as you travel down the river. You will be exploring, building, raising cattle, producing materials, and developing infrastructure, trying to become the most successful pioneer. How do you become the most successful pioneer and win the game? By having the most victory points after the second round. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components set up and how gameplay works in Boonlake. Now let's take a look at the components. You have the main game board. Around the outside of the main game board, you have the victory point track. On the left side of the main game board, you have 2 income tracks, one for coins and one for cards. At the top of the main game board is a blue box. This is for your interim scoring. This will be done in the middle and at the end of each round. At the bottom of the main game board, you have spaces for scoring tiles. Below those are used for the interim scoring, and above those are used for the projects. Above that is a box that summarizes the final scoring. In the middle of the game board, you have a map that is divided into 4 regions and a river that runs through. For the river, each space can have only one ship unless it has an anchor symbol. There are 3 locks on the main game board down the river. When the first player crosses one of these locks, we will do an interim scoring. The first lock down the river has directions based on the round. Round 1, you'll go to the upper river, and round 2, you'll go to the lower river. For the 4 regions on the map, you'll be placing tiles and gaining the benefits, as well as being able to score that region. The action board. In the middle of the action board is where your action strips will be located. Underneath and to the left on the action board, you will have a movement and victory point cost for the action strip that you choose. Action strips. On the top left, you have the type of action strip, and on the action strip, you have actions. To the left of the arrow are individual actions, and to the right of the arrow are all player actions. Building tiles. You have regular building tiles with the gray back, starting building tiles with the player numbers, and cattle pastures. On the front of the building tiles, you have sites. These tiles can contain up to 2 sites. Project cards. On the left at the very top, you have the kind of card. The sun is day, the red is sunset, and the moon is night. Under the kind of card is the cost of the card. To the right of the cost is the reward. If it has a lightning bolt, it is immediate. If it has a black bar above it, it is an in-game effect. And if it has a green bar, it is a permanent effect. In the middle of the card is a depiction. The name of the card is at the bottom, and the victory points for the card is in the bottom right. Scoring tiles. Across the top is the special projects, and at the bottom is the scoring. You'll be scoring this part during every interim scoring. Double-sided player boards. You have the player board on one side, and the board used for the automated player on the other side. On the left side of the player board at the top, you have the production sites. Below that, you have your canal, which will gather resources. Below the canal, you have buildings and cattle. You have spaces for houses, settlements, cattle, and the spaces on the left are spaces for inhabitants when you clear a row or tier. In the bottom left of your player board, you'll have the ranch. On the right side of your player board is your modernization area. This is where you may gain levers. For each player, you have production sites, wood, loam, stone, and iron. In each player color, you have a ship that will travel down the river, 3 player markers, a double-sided 100 or 200 scoring tile, 4 scoring markers, 2 boats that will be located on your canal, 4 settlements, 5 cattle, 6 houses, and 10 inhabitants. Then we have a first player token, region markers, vases, levers, coins in 1, 5, and 20, and solo tiles. And finally, your rulebook. Now let's take a look at the setup. We're going to be setting this up for a 3-player game which takes 14 steps. Step 1, place the main game board in the center of the play area. Step 2, sort building tiles. Sort the building tiles based on the back of the tile and place them to the side of the play area. Step 3, shuffle and place building tiles. Shuffle the building tiles with the gray backs face down and place them fanned out next to the main board. Then you'll place the stack of cattle pastures next to those fanned out tiles. Step 4, place starting building tiles. Based on the number of players, you'll place a number of building tiles on the main board. You'll place them on the main board on one of the matching symbols, but it doesn't have to be the exact matching symbol. So it may have a 3-player indicator, and you could place a 2-player tile. Step 5, place a region marker in each of the 4 regions on the main game board. Step 6, create supply pools. Create supply pools for the vases, levers, and coins next to the game board. Step 7. Shuffle, place, and draw project cards. Shuffle the project cards, placing them next to the game board face down. Then each player will draw 6 to their hand. Step 8. Place and set up the action board. Place the action board next to the main game board. Then place the action strips randomly on the action board. Step 9. Get and place a player board in the center of your player area. Step 10. Get player components. Choose a color and get the corresponding houses, settlements, cattle, inhabitants, ship, boats, player markers, scoring markers, 100, 200 scoring tile, and 4 production sites. Step 11. Place player components. Place the houses, settlements, and cattle in their corresponding spaces in the center of your player board. For inhabitants, 3 are placed on the ranch spot in the bottom left of your player board, 2 next to your houses, and 5 to the general supply. Your ship is placed on the river space based on the number of players, the first spot for a 1 or 2 player game, or the third spot for a 3 or 4 player game. Your 2 boats will go in the leftmost canal space on your player board. For the player markers, 1 will go on the start space on the victory point track, 1 on the 2 coin space on the coin track, and 1 on the 2 card space on the card track. Then place the scoring markers and production markers next to your player board, along with your 100, 200 scoring tile. Step 12, draw and place scoring tiles. Draw 2 scoring tiles and choose 1 to place in your corresponding colors area at the bottom of the main game board. You'll want to make sure that you look at your hand of cards before making this decision. Then in a 1 to 3 player game, you'll choose a random scoring tile for the unused colors. Step 13, choose a start player and get money. The player that last traveled to a place with less than 100 people gets the start player token. Then in turn order, players will get money. The first player will get 6, second will get 7, third and fourth would get 8. And then finally, step 14, place a production site. Each player will choose one of their production sites to place at the top of their main board with the 1 face up. This will produce 1 of that resource in the game. Make sure that you look at your hand before making this choice. Now let's take a look at the gameplay. A game consists of 2 rounds. A round consists of player turns until a player moves their own ship onto the last river space on the board. Also during each round, you will score twice, 1 halfway when a player crosses the first lock space, and 1 at the end of the round when a player crosses the second lock space. Starting with the first player and proceeding clockwise, players will take turns. A player's turn. A player's turn consists of 3 phases: action phase, ship phase, and the action strip reset phase. Now let's look at each in detail. Phase 1, the action phase. You will choose 1 action strip and carry out the actions. When you choose an action strip, you'd place it at the bottom of the action board. If you chose one that was in the bottom 2 rows, you would lose a number of victory points. For all of the action strips, you start by playing a card from your hand, paying its cost, or discarding it for money, or neither. Then the active player would carry out the action in the middle of the tile to the left of the arrow. You would carry out those actions from left to right. And you can emit effects if you wish. And then finally, all players, including the active player, may carry out the effect to the right of the arrow, keeping in mind that the Pioneer action is the only action strip where the active player cannot take the action on the right of the arrow. Now let's look at the action strips in detail and the actions. There are 7 action strips. You have Pioneer, which is the spyglass symbol in the left corner. You may play a day card or discard a day card, explore twice, then develop or upgrade once. And all other players may draw 2 and play or discard 1. The settle action strip, or the flag symbol. You may play a knight card or discard a card, develop or upgrade 1, and then all players develop or upgrade 1, or play or discard a card. The cattle breeding action strip, or the meat symbol, you may play a day card or discard a card, place a cattle pasture tile next to a building tile and take the reward. If you can't, you could get 2 coin. And all players place a cattle or play or discard a card. To place cattle, you would choose a pasture with 3 or less cattle based on how many it contains. You would return a number of your inhabitants based on the total, including the one you're placing. For your 4th or 5th cattle that you are placing, you would give up 1 or 2 more inhabitants or 4 victory points for each of those inhabitants. This can be in any combination, so 2 inhabitants, or an inhabitant and 4 victory points, or 8 victory points. Then you would place the cattle, gain the tier bonus if you clear a tier or row, and then finally you'll take 2 coins for each adjacent house. These houses do not have to be your houses. Region scoring action strip, or the trophy symbol. You may play a sunset card or discard a sunset card, choose one of the 4 regions whose reward hasn't been covered, and choose a reward to cover and gain that reward. Then the other 3 regions are scored for all players, gaining 1 coin for each presence in the region. The higher action strip, or the hat, you may play a night card or discard, then you would take an inhabitant and explore 1. Then all players can pay 3 coins or cards for inhabitants as many times as they like. Progress action strip. This is the lever. Play a sunset card or discard a card and modernize 1. When you modernize, you would pay the cost on an unoccupied space on your player board and place a lever tile. Levers can be used for bonuses and are refreshed when directed. Then all players can return an inhabitant to modernize 1 or draw a card. And then finally the builder action strip, or the garden tool. You will get 3 coins and play any card or draw 2 cards. Then all players will get to play or discard a card. Now let's look at the actions. When playing a card, you have to pay the cost in the top left, and you must check the type of card, whether it be day, sunset, or night. Coins are paid to the supply along with the vases. Resources are paid by having the number available through your production sites and your canal boats. When you need to move your canal boats to gain resources, you would pay 0 coin to move it any spaces to the right, and 2 coin to move it any spaces to the left. The effects of the card at the top of the card: lightning bolt is the immediate effect, an arrow is the in-game bonus, and green is a permanent bonus. The victory points for the card are in the bottom right, and you will score these at the end of the game. Instead of playing a card, you can settle special projects. You would pay the cost, which is the top left, to gain the reward, which is on the top right. When doing so, you would place your inhabitant on your color above that scoring tile. You will notice that on the scoring tile you chose, you have a 2 times victory point bonus on that tile, which is why you want to check your cards before choosing. Exploring. This is where you add a new building tile. This is depicted with a gray building tile and an arrow. When carrying out this action, you would take 3 steps. Step 1, reveal a gray building tile. Step 2, place the tile adjacent to a building tile or across the bridge from a building tile. Step 3, you would get the space's reward. If all spaces are occupied, you would get a 2 coin bonus instead. The develop action. This is depicted by an inhabitant with a down arrow. This is carried out in 2 steps. Step 1, choose an unoccupied site on a building tile. And step 2, place an inhabitant from your ranch on the site and take the reward or pay the cost. The upgrade action. This is depicted by a green up arrow. You can upgrade an inhabitant to a house or house to a settlement. The inhabitant must already be on a building site. You will return the inhabitant and 1 from your ranch to the supply. If the house clears out a tier, you would get the tier bonus. For the house to settlement, you would choose a house adjacent to 3 presences, return 2 inhabitants to the supply. For the 3rd or 4th settlement, you would require 1 or 2 more inhabitants or 4 victory points each. If you build in a region where you already have a settlement, you lose 5 victory points. This is indicated on your player board. For any tier bonuses, when you clear out a row, you would be able to take that inhabitant and place him on your ranch. Once the actions have been taken, we move to Phase 2. Phase 2, the ship phase. You may move your ship along the river. The max number of spaces that you can move is the corresponding water number from the action board where you chose your action strip. When you move your ship, you would get the bonus of the space that you ended your movement. Keep in mind that you have to advance at least 1 space. Harbors, or the anchor symbol, can have any number of ships, and every other space can only have 1 ship. Spaces other than harbors with ships located on them are skipped when counting your movement. For the fork in the river, you would take the upper arm for round 1 and the lower arm for round 2. If you are the first to cross a lock, interim scoring would take place after your turn. Once the active player moves their ship, we move to Phase 3. Phase 3, the action strip reset phase. You would push the action strips together, with the recently chosen action strip at the bottom space on the action strip board. Then it would become the next player's turn. Then turns would continue going clockwise until the first player moves their ship past a lock. We would move into the interim scoring. All scoring is immediate except the last interim scoring, where it is done after the last player of that round. Interim scoring. Interim scoring is carried out in 5 steps. Step 1, players play a card or upgrade, and you can do this twice. Step 2, place a scoring marker under one of your scoring tiles in your color. You'll score the victory points on the tile if you meet the conditions, or lose the victory points on the tile if you don't. Step 3, income. You'll gain the coins, cards, and victory points from your income tracks, also from your vindicated spaces on your player board, and your cattle scoring. For each cattle on the main game board, you would get 1 victory point per adjacent settlement to your cattle. Step 4, levers. You would refresh all of your levers, moving them up, and for every lever that you did not use, you would gain 1 victory point. And then finally, step 5, refresh region markers. You would move them off of their bonuses. After the second interim scoring, all ships would go back to the starting space, and turns would continue. After round 2's second interim scoring, we would go to the final scoring. The final scoring takes 3 steps. Step 1, score levers. If you have 4 to 6 levers on your player board, you will gain 2 victory points per lever. If you have 7 or more levers, you will gain 3 victory points. Step 2, score cards. For each of the cards that you have played, you would score the victory points on the bottom right. And then finally, step 3, score tiers. This is for your 3rd, 4th, and 5th row on your player board. For the 3rd row, you would score 2 victory points for each piece removed. For the 4th row, you would score 4 victory points for each piece removed. And for the 5th row, you would score 6 victory points for each piece removed. Once all the players finish the final scoring, the player with the most victory points is the most successful pioneer and wins Boonlake.